Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fleet News Group podcast. I'm Mark Sibbald. I'm your host for this episode. Our regular host, Carolyn Falls, has enjoyed a holiday in Italy so much she's taking another couple of weeks off. So you've got me, and I'm excited to bring you Rob Dietz from Roev. Roev is a company that's been around in the industry for a while, and I first met Paul and Noah back at an EV show in Canberra several years ago. And I'll tell you what, when I saw what the product they had on offer, which was a Toyota Hilux converted to an electric vehicle, it blew my mind. There was a lot of talk in fleets about the conversion to EVs, and there was a lot of hesitance, and there was a lot of demand for a dual cab ute with an electric motor. And when I saw this conversion opportunity that was backed by some pretty smart guys, I thought, here we go. We're maybe heading towards an electric vehicle future for fleets. But a couple of things have happened along that journey. So, Rob, welcome. Thanks for being a guest on our podcast.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So it sounds like, oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Rob, welcome to our podcast. There's been a bit of a bumpy road, let's say, or a bit of a changing, winding road since that first time I met the boys down in Canberra. Give us a bit of the background on the events of, how Roev came to be and what's happened since that time.
Yeah, so actually how we met it informs what we ended up doing and even what we're doing today. But Noah and Paul and I were the executive leadership team at Atlassian, a software company that's based here in Australia. And we ran the SaaS division, basically. And we were helping our customers move from on-prem software to web-based software. And we used to have discussions all the time outside of work about some of the interests that we had. And Paul was an energy geek, and Noah and I used to talk all the time about classic cars and doing our own modifications and things like that. I kind of grew up working on my own cars. Noah comes from kind of a Ford-esque background with family members having worked in the auto industry in the US. And then Paul has been kind of cutting edge with the home power walls and solar and Tesla sort of experimentation really early on. And then as we were all kind of leaving Atlassian at different times, Noah started playing with the conversion idea. What would happen if he actually created a business around that? And then the more we chatted about it, the more we started talking about what the future could look like. And so then we found we all kind of aligned with this future of a vehicle to grid future with batteries on wheels and virtual power plants. And that was kind of an exciting future that we could see ourselves participating in, especially because it had some anchoring in doing something good for the environment, helping people move from ICE engines or internal combustion engines to EVs. And so that was kind of the genesis of that. Was what if we started looking at what EVs could be from a batteries on wheels point of view.
Yeah, wow, sounds exciting, and it's certainly a lot of what people talk about the virtual power plants and V to grid. And you're obviously several years ahead of the market because the government's only recently announced that V to G has been approved. So how did you end up with a Hilux as being the mule for your first iteration of conversion?
Well, that was kind of interesting. So once we started looking at this idea of power walls on wheels, we looked for gaps in the market. So in other words, if you were going to do this and do it at scale, where would you consider doing it? And Australia, I mean, you have to admit, it's kind of been the dumping ground for OEMs to bring some of the least efficient vehicles that they have in their lineups. And utes were certainly lagging behind. And so as we started investigating that, it looked like that would be a good opportunity since it's a newer vehicle, and most conversions have been pre-1990s, mostly because of the integration with CAN bus systems. And it's far more complicated to do a vehicle with multiple computers than it is to do the old style, where you could just basically do a drivetrain swap. And so then once we started looking at utes, we determined that consumers would actually probably be less likely to want to take a risk in doing something like that, where fleets actually, they use them at higher kilometers, so they would be saving and doing more, and the gap pain was more acute there. And so we started focusing on fleets. But getting to your original point, it was a little bit ahead of its time. So we started talking to fleets and just started asking them, what would you think about this? And here's a product we're considering doing. And we started the engineering work. We brought in some automotive people to help support our software-based teams. And we just found that the appetite was actually pretty high. So we'd be talking to fleets about, how many vehicles they would want to do. But what was interesting was a few things. They didn't care at all about vehicle to grid. That is so far off their roadmap. So that was one of the early indicators that we needed to kind of come backwards and meet them where their pain points were. And then the second thing is even if they had 500 utes, they were like, well, I only really want to do 2 or 3 and test them and see how it goes. And so we were catching them really early in the curve. But the pain points that came from those dialogues were pretty interesting, which was, okay, now that we'll do 3 or 4 of these things, which one should we do in our fleet to get the best bang for the buck? And how are we going to handle charging when we bring these in? What do you suggest? Which those 2 questions were actually kind of outside of our original wheelhouse when we first started. But what we found was if we could answer the first question of helping them understand which vehicles, it kind of de-risked the transition for them a little bit and made the trial more palatable, and that they felt like it would be more likely to succeed.
Mm. So how far did you get? Because I know you put out an expression of interest, and from memory, it was maybe 1,000 vehicles, or there was a number that you thought you could build in the first year or something like that, and you were oversubscribed. So even though there was maybe small 2s and 3s, the interest was there, wasn't it? Did you get to the point of actually building and almost delivering some, or did it?
Well, what we ended up doing is we did a couple. You call them. We had the mules. So we started basically converting existing late model Hiluxes to see how difficult it was going to be. We started the engineering work to move to scale. So we tried to understand what the vehicle requirements were going to be, how we could maintain the safety rating. I mean, basically, as soon as you start modifying an ANCAP rated vehicle, you lose that rating. But we wanted to make sure that if we were taking a safe vehicle, we were delivering a safe vehicle. And so we were trying to kind of reverse engineer the CAN bus of the Hilux so that we could integrate, so that when we were done with the vehicle, it wasn't a Christmas tree cluster with all the lights going off because of not being able to understand how to basically integrate the new motors, for instance, and making sure that the ABS was still going to work in the right way. And if it was in an accident, would the motors stop running? Those sorts of things. But I think we had gotten near the subscription, about, I want to say, over 40 million in pre-orders with deposits down on them. But then the real challenges started happening, which is you need capital in order to turn those orders into actual deliveries. And the CAN bus integration engineering work was taking a bit longer than we were hoping for. And at the same time, the capital markets were somewhat collapsing from the cost of living, and the interest rates were going up. So capital was becoming more expensive, and the appetite for that type of risk was diminishing pretty rapidly.
Yeah. Do you think it's a possibility? Like, manufacturers have advanced their product range significantly in the last few months. There's been a few different announcements. Do you think the conversion market is still there for maybe things like mining or other high volume users of utes that need to reduce their emissions?
Absolutely. I think especially as the material lists come down. I mean, when we were first producing our price points, I would actually argue that it was pretty much at the height, but that's maybe not too fair, but the cost of goods was pretty high. Batteries were expensive, motors were expensive, and everybody was looking at this increasing growth of EVs. So there was almost a false sense of availability, and that it was going to be shrinking, and so the prices were going up substantially. And then you do get better deals at quantity. But now that it looks like there might be an overabundance of capacity in some of the battery manufacturers and some of the motor manufacturers, if you can cut that conversion price down by half, just in the cost of goods, and you can get the conversion process down to 5 days, in on Monday, out on Friday, I think you could see a fairly large uptake. And I think we're also seeing the hesitancy of the OEMs to truly produce full bore EVs versus the plug-in hybrids they're starting to lean towards. And so I think that actually increases the runway for a conversion company to actually have some level of success.
Yeah, and I know in the transport, when you get to bigger fleet vehicles, they are talking about newer rather than completely new. So that conversion market is for trucks is certainly an opportunity there. I don't think it's a dead market yet. I think there's still opportunities for people. But let's move on from that, because you've obviously reached a point where the things weren't aligning. You mentioned capital markets and you mentioned rising prices and costs. So Roev has now pivoted. You've rebranded. Can you tell us a little bit the journey you've been on the last 6 or 12 months?
Yeah, well, in some respects, it's actually tied to the hardware side and some of the challenges. One of the questions we would get is, why are 3 software guys doing hardware conversions? And even though we had augmented the team with people from Holden and GM, the idea was, it's still like, why are 3 software people doing this? And your experience on the software side is extensive. I mean, we come from Apple and Microsoft and Atlassian, VMware, and building software at scale isn't an issue. And originally, when we got into the whole mix, the idea was hardware and software, this ability to do the V2G, the ability to do vehicle to load, and optimize the in and output of energy into a vehicle. But what we found with that was, as we started solving the problems for the fleet managers who we were trying to sell the hardware to, so which vehicles should I do in my fleet? How should I think about charging? How can I de-risk this transition? The tools that we started building for ourselves to build confidence with our hardware customers, we actually found had maybe runway outside of the conversions. So it's a pain point. And as we kept coming closer and closer to today's pain points for fleet managers, what we found is if we take their fuel card data, we can easily tell them what 5, 6, 10, 15 vehicles would make the most sense to get transitioned to EV, and make sure, based on duty cycle, where it's fueling, the costs of energy versus petrol, where they can get that balance of, if I'm going to invest $1, how can I get the most effective use of that dollar in emissions reductions and fuel savings? So the software tool that we originally built, we just decided to lean into and say, we think there's something here to still accelerate this transition for fleets to EV and to plug-in hybrids. And it turns out that when you got 3 software people leaning back into software, you can move pretty fast, and some of the roadblocks we had with the hardware side kind of dissipated, because now we're fully focused on the things that are well within our wheelhouse.
Yeah, and you mentioned fuel card data, and this is the thing that got me really excited about the product you're talking about, in that so many fleet managers, they feel paralyzed by the amount of data they start talking electricity and how much power they need, and it does go outside their wheelhouse. So it does kind of create a bit of they stall a bit on the process. But maybe if in just a bit more detail, I know you're still developing the product and enhancing it, but you're essentially saying, if you can get fuel card data, which everyone has, you can plug that into your system and you can create a transition plan or can create a roadmap for their transition. Is that the idea?
Yeah, it certainly helps, because once you have the fuel card data, so we actually do a lot of things, and one of our design principles is, if you give us one piece of data, we're going to try to give you 10x value for that piece of data. And so the fuel cards, the Excel spreadsheets, we basically built a little AI engine that allows us to take any fuel card data, so you don't have to do any data cleansing or remap your columns to our columns. We go in and find the data we want. And with a rego, we can now go out and go, okay, now we can understand what vehicle it is, what classification it is, what the base efficiency of it is, what year it was actually put into service. We can also then know from the fuel card data where it fueled, how much it fueled in many different locations. We can overlay that now with public charging, if in depot locations, things like that. But we can bring all that information back and then give you an idea of which vehicles are using the most fuel, which ones have spikiness, which don't make them really suitable for conversion or transition, which ones might be better for a plug-in hybrid versus a straight EV. And that actually now is something that you can kind of explore and play with and see insights you might not have been able to see from a static spreadsheet. And with that, yeah, we can tell you if you've got 150 vehicles, these 30, we can find you an EV in market with the capacity to match the duty cycle that can be charged, overnight, that's going to be successfully deployed in your fleet. And again, it just reduces the risk that you're taking, helps make you more informed. You can now take those sorts of things to your sustainability manager and say, here's what we're looking at from CO2 savings. You could take it to your facilities manager and go, here's how many megawatts of energy we're going to need to replicate from a fueling point of view. You can take it to the CFO and go, here's how much money we're going to save if we do this from a fueling point of view. And so we know that the new world is multi-stakeholder, and this acts as a kind of a shared source of truth. And we've actually built it so that everybody can be in the same portal, viewing the same data at the same time, so that you're no longer having to just rely on screenshots and emailing those things around.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, the fuel card, I'm just going to harp on this a little bit, is that everyone has one. If you're running a fleet, you have a fuel card. Whereas a lot of people have suggested telematics, you need telematics to be able to plan the transition. And no doubt, if you've got telematics, that will help you. But if you haven't got telematics, the fuel card seems to be the perfect solution. So are you getting, you're obviously getting liters, you're getting, dollar value, you're getting fuel type, but you're also getting things like location and then you're understanding distance between fuels because of odometer readings and average travel and things like that. Is that the sort of data you're using or pulling apart?
If we get the odo, yeah, if we have the odometer, that helps. But we don't actually require it. You can infer a lot of things from the spikiness of the fueling data. So the amount of time in between fuelings and the amount of fuelings and then the locations that you're fueling, you can extrapolate a lot of information from that data alone. But it is interesting you mentioned the telematics, because if you add a layer of telematics on top of it, it can become more powerful. But what we're finding is that people who didn't want to pay, for the telematics devices, they're actually saying, I didn't think I could see my data like this. And it does do quite a good representation or proxy of what you would have gotten from that telematics data.
Yeah, so and I suppose this is where your experience with software and coming from another industry and understanding how people can use data and present data and you mentioned AI, using that smarts, applying it to the fleet industry, that seems to be where the real benefit is and how you're able to do that. Would that be true?
Well, it is interesting. So I actually ran the user experience for Microsoft's Bing property, Bing is a search engine, and data was at the core of everything we did. So any little change you would make on the screen had to earn its way into the experience that consumers would actually get. But we also had the ability to look at different comparisons, so we could run things. So data and the way that we think about data is, and we had similar things at Atlassian, it's kind of at our core. And so one of the things you learn when you work with data a ton is, how can I present that data in a way that is the most easily consumable, and not only consumable, but useful in a way that I can make a decision from it. Because data for data's sake is more confusing and paralyzing than anything else. But data for action, and here is a question that I have, how can I answer it? Then it becomes super valuable. For instance, if you were like, well, I'm interested in jumpstarting my transition with home charging. Well, that's a question you can answer and go, okay, just show me all my vehicles that have duty cycles low enough to do a level 1 overnight charge, that we know somebody at the home could do that. Because I don't want to pay for a level 2 charger install. I'm not sure about the risks of doing that, or if the employee leaves, blah, blah, blah. You can put that criteria around there and go, okay, here are the 25 vehicles in your fleet. You could start tomorrow with a home charge program. That sort of data is actionable and useful versus just, here's all your vehicles and generally what they use from an energy point of view.
No, excellent. So let's just talk the rebrand. So you've rebranded. I like logos. So the logo looks different now as well. So that's part of the pivot. Is there anything else in the pivot that, have you given up on the conversions altogether? It's all about the software now and providing the solution to fleets?
Basically, what we're doing is we're looking at two very separate tracks. So there's still some opportunity on the conversion side, especially as some of the technology gets more and more advanced. So, for instance, if you can create a box that interacts with the CAN bus system, that would alleviate a lot of the problems that were going to be months, if not a year worth of trial and error and safety testing and things like that. So there are still conversations going on that, but we're really separating the two so that software can run and solve the longer term transition and almost be like your fuel and energy dashboard of the future. Like you can make it so that longer term it's the place you can get really updated information. And just to throw out like another use case, when plug-in hybrids come out, those things are going to have a massive variety of what it could cost to run that thing. If its duty cycle is capable of running fully on battery and you charge that battery at home, even if you gave your employee, $150, $200 a month and the energy is actually only costing you $75, that might only run you $1,500 a year. But if you don't charge that thing and only use petrol, that thing will be $5,000, $6,000 to run. So the deltas in this vehicle and the way you think about energy going in it is going to be massive. And even fast charge can run you, if you're doing that middle of the day, 55, 60 cents a kilowatt hour. At home, that could be anywhere between 8 cents a kilowatt hour, 15 cents a kilowatt hour. And so the variability of fueling is going to be more dramatic than it was in just a petrol world. And so we see the software as being that portal to those sorts of things to go, hey, did you know last week that plug-in hybrid didn't get charged anywhere for any amount of time? You spent an extra $250 that week that you could have been saving. And to us, that's where maybe the future of the multi-fuel, multi-mixed fleet will kind of find some of the biggest benefit and bang for the dollar when it comes to fueling.
Yeah, listening to you there, you really, I think about it often, but you've crystallized it for me in that we're all used to seeing the price of petrol on the price boards as we drive down the petrol station. So we all kind of have a good idea roughly of what petrol costs. Some fleet drivers don't even, they just don't care because they're not paying for it. But as a fleet manager, you need to know what it costs. And as you're transitioning, and if you don't know the rate, if you go to a fast charger and pay 80 cents a kilowatts one day, or you go to a slow charger and get it for free the next day, not knowing that information or not having the visibility really impacts your ability to manage the fleet and flowing critical.
Yeah, absolutely. We are looking at doing automated reporting, but getting to that point, it's even more complicated in that the billing system. So like if, let's say you do have somebody and they can charge the vehicle at home, that's a different billing system. Now they're on route, that's a different billing system. Now they're at the depot, that's a different billing system and a different energy source. And now let's just say it's again a plug-in hybrid. Now you add petrol to that mix. You will not be able to find a fleet manager in the country that could point to a vehicle and tell you what it costs to run that vehicle in that scenario. And so what we're looking at is that what we're calling the unified fuel profile is if you can ingest all that data, use an AI engine to kind of normalize it, extrapolate the pieces of data that are missing, you can at least give them like a 90% confident view of what that vehicle runs versus being a black box, which is currently what it would be in today's world.
No, interesting. All right. So the future, as far as product go live, as far as rolling it out for fleets, have you got timelines that you're working to get this into market?
Yeah, so we've been working with design partners over the last 3 to 4 months, kind of honing what we're building. We're just releasing it to market. We had our coming out party a couple of weeks ago at the Mobility Live in Melbourne, where we shared the product for the first time externally. And we're really looking to put the accelerator down in the new year. And we're talking with all sorts of end fleets, councils, governments, as well as FMOs and energy companies. I mean, it's interesting that different audiences are seeing different benefits from it, which is interesting. Like some of the OEMs are looking at it and saying, hey, this would help me sell more vehicles into the fleets that are coming to me because I can tell them exactly what they're going to save and what the emissions drop is on any vehicle that they're looking at, the changeover plan for. And so that's quite different than a straight fleet manager who's like, hey, I'm on the hook to deliver this plan by, the end of the quarter. I need help and I just need to save time. And the tool helps them save time. So saving time in one respect, de-risking versus helping them make sales. But in the new year, we're really looking at trying to get into as many hands as possible and continue to build out the feature sets.
Yeah, excellent. I saw you at your stand there at Mobility Live. Your dance card looked pretty full. There was a lot of people that seemed kind of really interested to learn after they'd have a bit of a taste. So, hopefully that's built a good pipeline for you.
I am still doing meetings from that. That was actually a little bit surprising, but yeah, we're getting some really good uptake from people I think the people who are pushing their fleets understand more readily what these problem sets are, and people who are a little bit behind, like when you bring up the unified fuel profile and that inability to point at a vehicle and go, what does that run? You can kind of see their eyebrows go up and go, oh yeah, I'm going to have that problem. I do have vehicles that are sometimes at the depot and sometimes en route. Or, man, I didn't even think that I wasn't going to save that much money because I'm doing fast charging and that's actually quite expensive. So those sorts of interactions, I think, are what people are then interested in deep diving on and going, okay, how can you help us solve that problem?
Even if you have all electric vehicles, the way the market's going, you're probably going to have 6 apps that you're using to refuel. So you're going to have to consolidate that data, which is what your system would be perfect for.
Yeah, at some point, yeah. You need to be able to point at a vehicle and either have some level of understanding of what it costs or the ability to kind of almost guarantee that the volatility of the energy. And so you can think about it in a number of ways, kind of making consistent pricing decisions, or it could be, I want to maximize what I can save.
All right, excellent, Rob. It's been a pleasure. We've met several times. We've had several conversations, and I learn something new every time. So I'm really excited. I've been on this journey, as I mentioned, since Canberra. With that EV show with Roev. So I'm glad to see you guys still in there and pivoting towards a solution that I think the market really needs. So well done to you and the team.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thanks for the time. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, excellent. All right, everyone, that's another episode with me, your host, Mark Sibbald. I'd like to thank Geotab for being our podcast sponsor this year. If you are looking at telematics, please give the team at Geotab a ring through one of their many, many resellers. And we might have 1 or 2 episodes left in the year, so keep listening, keep subscribing, and make sure you tell your friends, because there's plenty of other fleet nerds like me out there that love to listen to this stuff.
You've been listening to Fleet Auto News podcast. It was edited and produced by Isabella Fiorentino. The original theme music for this podcast was created by Isabella Fiorentino. You can follow us on Spotify. Just search for Fleet Auto News. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Our website is fleetautonews.com, where you can get all our stories, videos, and podcasts. Until next time, drive safely and take care.